Welcome back to the show, everyone. Today, we're diving deep into the world of relationships. It's like everybody's favorite topic all the time because relationships are an ever evolving landscape where I find the rules from past generations of how relationships were once navigated don't seem to fully apply anymore in this generation, in this new paradigm. And if you've ever wondered why your approach to love, friendships, or even family connections feels different from your parents or how your grandparents navigated relationships, then you're in the right place. We're living in a whole new world and we're learning how to navigate it together because in past generations, relationships often thrived on a model of emotional restraint. And this old model, while it's supportive of survival and stability, it often discouraged vulnerability and authenticity. Today, however, the paradigm has shifted towards radical authenticity, where openness, expression, vulnerability, and truth are super encouraged. But with this shift into today's version of relationships also comes new challenges, especially in dating, where old patterns might clash with our evolving expectations. So let's get into it. Becoming a co-creator with the creator is your birthright. Together, we'll journey into your deepest authenticity. Because the more you align with who you truly are, the more effortlessly you call in the life that you desire and deserve. And most importantly, the more you step into your soul's highest purpose. Welcome to the Manifestation Method podcast, your number one source for Kabbalistic manifestation. Here we combine the ancient wisdom of Kabbalah, modern psychology, and quantum physics to help you achieve real, tangible manifestation results with my proven Abra method. I'm Ayelet Polonsky, and I'm here to guide you on your journey of manifesting a life that is aligned, expansive, and deeply connected to your highest self through the sacred energetic mechanics of Kabbalistic manifestation. To learn how to use Kabbalistic manifestation to transform your life from the inside out, go to ayeletpolonsky.com or download the Manifestation Method app. Let's open the gates of manifestation together.
Yeah, this just makes me think too, like we are so fortunate as a generation to have the time and the space. Like literally, I was just like, wow, even having a washing machine, that can do your laundry in 30 minutes. Like our grandparents didn't have that, and sure as heck, our great grandparents did not have those kinds of tools just to have space and time in their life. And it's a double-edged sword because sometimes too, I think that we can be really fixated on like what is perfect or what is like we're unable to discern what's actually for us or what's a challenge versus things that we could even be putting blocks or stumbling blocks in front of ourselves to having authentic relationships.
Totally. And I think where we begin is first, for those of you who are like, what do you mean old paradigm, new paradigm? Like, what is that? What are you talking about, Ayala, right? Okay, so let's first define what we're talking about here. And
Yeah,
let's
old paradigm versus new.
old paradigm versus new. Okay, and let's talk about like the shift itself. See, in the old school paradigm, relationships were often practical and based on a survival mentality. It was all about, I'd say, meeting societal norms. So it might look like starting a family, pooling resources, creating stability, stuff like
Sharing
that.
finances.
Sharing finances, procreating. And so think about it. When you're living in this old school paradigm, there's no time or space for emotional vulnerability. In fact, emotions were often suppressed or even expressed through indirect means because vulnerability in many ways was seen back then as a potential weakness or a threat to the survival of the relationship. So conflict resolution was less about true understanding and more about maintaining the peace. And, we see that even for most of us, I'm sure. You look at the way that your parents navigate relationships. I mean, old school paradigm doesn't go much further back than the previous generation. It's really our generation that is diving in full force into this new paradigm. And it's important to know how to navigate it because I know, like, my parents, while they're best friends and they have a beautiful relationship in its own right, I didn't grow up with the conditioning that saw my parents having deep, open, authentic, vulnerable conversations with one another, right? It was more of just like, get the job done. And so
Can you
today,
also share a little bit too about what you mean by indirect means, like expressing your emotions and your authenticity through indirect means?
yeah. So, I mean, I think when we're not first off, when we're feeling something internally that is out of alignment, back then in the old school paradigm, communicating it directly was not the way to navigate it, right? Because that posed a threat to the relationship. And so by expressing our emotions directly back then, what that could often result in is, oh, I'm seen and this is a conflict or doesn't align with how my partner sees it. And so therefore there was this like underlying narrative that the relationship is threatened and it might end or we might not be able to sustain the relationship. And so we would then navigate these emotions that they felt back then because it's inevitable. They're feeling what they're feeling, but they're just not communicating it. And so it might be expressed in, the man going out drinking, coming home drunk, maybe the man or the woman even, like, let's not be gender biased here, but either one might be emotionally abusive, right? It could mean that the woman is just like ravaging her husband in a negative way, like ravaging in the sense that she's constantly yelling at him or she's
Nitpicking.
or she's emotionally abusive or he's emotionally abusive or physically abusive, right? Because these emotions need to be expressed. They need an outlet somehow, some way. But because they were not communicating then consciously and directly, then these tendencies would express themselves in unhealthy ways, right? But today we're, on the contrary, living in a world where radical authenticity has taken center stage, right? Emotional awareness and openness are seen as the foundation, as the bedrock of a healthy connection. And so we're invited to express our truth more, to set clear boundaries, and to let our partners know who we are right from the start, right? And boundary work and expressing our boundaries is not a given, right? Like as a young girl, we're not often taught the word no, right? It's like, let me just be submissive to my partner and not express myself
And not rock the boat.
and not rock the boat out of fear, okay? And but here's the
And also,
paradox.
this goes for men too. Like, so many men too do not have the tools. Like, honestly, until like even the millennial generation, most men are not taught how to express their emotions or to emotionally regulate. And I think too, this is true for a lot of men, like thinking that, like the old idea of having to be like perceived as the rock or really, really strong and not be able to share your emotions. This is also a huge learning curve for men in general.
Totally, totally. And there's a paradox here because even though we say we value authenticity in this new age paradigm of relationships, although many of us still carry old wounds, or outdated relationship scripts based on what we saw growing up in our households or in our communities. And so we may find ourselves slipping back into old survival tactics without even realizing it.
Yeah.
Right. And so here, I'll give you an example. Okay. So, like, picture, we'll call her Sarah, okay, who grew up in a household where emotional stoicism was the norm, and so when she entered a relationship with, we'll call him James, who values open expression, they hit a wall. Okay. So Sarah felt uncomfortable with the level of emotional openness that James brought to their relationship. And she was used to keeping her feelings to herself, while James saw openness as essential. And so this clash of values created tension because both felt that their approaches were correct. And in the new paradigm approach, we would encourage Sarah to look at her discomfort around self expression, not as something to be fixed per se, but as a place to explore her boundaries, her self truth, and her personal growth, right? And so that's what today's episode is about, is like how do we navigate these paradigms, because it's not like this new paradigm has been around for 100 years. I mean, we're really shifting from one generation to the next, and the shift is like cataclysmic. It's actually pretty huge, right?
And also just in general, like why we're talking about radical authenticity and how I agree, like our society really values radical authenticity right now, but I don't think a lot of people really take time to even understand what that means. And so therefore we're still facing a lot of the same challenges in relationships. So why is in general radical authenticity so challenging in new paradigm relationships?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say that like radical authenticity sounds empowering, but if we're getting really honest with ourselves, it's also really challenging. And why? Because it requires a certain level of vulnerability that many of us are not used to and haven't been conditioned into. Like, it's not our norm. If it was our status quo, if it's what we saw and experienced from a young age based on how our parents parented us, then we'd embody this new paradigm with no issues. But we have to be willing to voice things like our boundaries, our fears, our needs without fear of rejection. And that's scary. Like in this new paradigm, people are super encouraged to drop their masks, and that can feel risky. And that's what makes radical authenticity so challenging, right?
Yeah, we forget that vulnerability goes hand in hand with radical authenticity.
Yeah, yeah. And relationships, they become less about finding the one who will accept you and more about finding the courage within yourself to live truthfully and to let go of roles that no longer serve you, right?
Woo!
And that's the real work, because I think we're navigating the dating world trying to find the one who's going to fit into the mold that makes me feel seen and heard, and who's going to be that perfect person who like holds perfect space for me, right? But that's a high bar for anybody, and
So
and
true. And we
while
also have to do that for the other person too.
that's also a high bar for ourselves, and that's
The
why the
bar is
real
high, people.
the bar is high no matter what, because
Yeah.
it's like we're still kind of all in this paradigm, this new generation where the training wheels are still on the relationship dynamics, right? And so it's really about letting go of roles that don't serve us, finding the courage within ourselves and doing this inner work. And another reason why radical authenticity is so challenging is that it's so common to struggle with setting boundaries. I mean, I know for myself, like especially if your architecture, your being is used to people pleasing or seeking validation, how much more difficult is it to set boundaries? And setting boundaries goes hand in hand with being radically authentic, right? So, in an authentic relationship, boundaries are actually an expression of self respect, honoring oneself, and also respect and honoring of the other person. So part of this journey is understanding that healthy boundaries and radical authenticity is not only necessary, but it's an act of love.
How can people learn to also discern in themselves when they're like what is actually a healthy boundary versus being controlling in relationships and not being flexible?
So one thing that one of my mentors once told me, and it always just stuck, she gave the example of when you're on an airplane, you're about to take off, and the flight attendant says, if in case of an emergency, put the mask on yourself before you put it on a child. Okay. That's really hard to do when it's your own child, right? Like I have to put it on myself before I save my child's life. But the whole idea here is me first, you second with love. Me first, you second with love. If we're expressing boundaries from a place of anger, frustration, resentment, then oftentimes it might come across as harsh. But I also kind of want to rewrite this narrative around like being fierce around expressing boundaries is a bad thing, right? Like, when did expressing boundaries in a way that is a little bit fierce or a little bit ferocious, when did that become a bad thing? Because if you think about it, let's say you're approaching a mama tiger who's protecting her cubs and you're coming to attack her cubs. What is that mama tiger going to do? She's going to be ferocious and rightfully
Right.
so. Rightfully so. If
Yeah.
someone's crossing a boundary that really feels invasive and violating, yes, if the person has the capacity to hold a conscious conversation, a loving conversation, a compassionate, gentle conversation, that would be my first choice. But if the person has no understanding of energetic boundaries and respecting those boundaries, and they just keep coming back over and over again, trying to cross that boundary, then I might put my swords up a little bit more. I might get a little bit more fierce. So I think in navigating this boundary and to your question, like how to do it in a way that's not ferocious, I think it
Or
really
not necessarily ferocious, but like just even like controlling. Like sometimes I see people saying that boundaries or like this is my boundary, da da da, and it's a non-negotiable instead of like also kind of seeing maybe that that's not really coming from boundary as much as it's coming from control or feeling they need to be in control of the
well,
relationship.
the boundary is always for oneself. It's for oneself. It has nothing to do with the other person. You know, when you're trying to control another person, that means that you're trying to create a boundary for them. The boundary is not for them, the boundary is for you. Okay. And so sometimes that might be communicated in a way that is controlling. Again, if the person is not
Yeah.
honoring it, you know, but I think it really is important to start with the notion that I'm establishing this boundary for myself because I'm going according to my core values. And hopefully we can find a place of compromise. But if it doesn't come to a place of compromise, then I think it's inevitable. It might sound a little bit controlling. But I think starting with the premise is I'm doing this for me based on my core values and my truths and what's important to me, and also honoring the other person. Like it's not about changing the other person. It's about getting clear, what is it that I need in this moment.
Yeah.
You know?
Can you give some examples of like healthy boundaries?
Yeah. Okay. So, I can get a little bit transparent in my own relationship with Beryl, my husband. Like, so my husband tends to be a caretaker. Okay. So much so that he will often compromise on his own needs, or at least he used to. He's actually done a lot of beautiful holy work on establishing boundaries around this. But oftentimes, because he was scared to disappoint me, or he just really wants to make me happy, which is so honorable, at the same time, he would negate his own needs or sometimes his own values in order to make sure that I'm taken care of, that I'm comfortable. But then it ends up in him being burnt out or exhausted, or it can even get to the point where he does it so much that it turns into resentment, right? If
Ooh.
we're not careful. And so throughout these years of being married, he's had to learn how to navigate healthy boundaries for himself, which means, again, coming back to me first, you second with love. Okay, so, Beryl's the type who he knows that if I have a good night's sleep, I'm a pleasant person the next day. And so he'll end up sacrificing his sleep to wake up with our kids early in the morning so that I get a good night's rest. God bless him. But
We love
and
barrel shout out.
he's the best. And he actually does better on less sleep. Like he can function, like fully function on little sleep and still like navigate the day. Whereas I'm not necessarily like that. Like I need a good night's sleep in order to be in like my optimal state. And
Hmm.
so, but there might be nights where he gets to bed extra late. And so it takes a lot of courage for him to be able to say the night before, Ayelet, I've had a long day. I've gotten to bed late. I would really love it if you woke up with the kids tomorrow. And like 99% of the time, I'll be like, no problem. So, but even just getting true with himself, getting honest with himself, and being willing to accept that my wife may not have an optimal day tomorrow, and being able to be okay with upsetting the other person, because boundaries are meant to be resisted. And you see it from a young age, right? Like I tell my 5-year-old to clean up his mess. He's like, no, it's like boundaries are meant to be resisted. And so it's also about getting comfortable with the other person, not necessarily liking the boundaries that we're setting. But then it's like, again, coming back to like radical honesty and authenticity, and also like trusting that by being honest and radically authentic, it actually strengthens the relationship. Like by him getting clearer on his boundaries and articulating what he needs and asking for what he needs, I've actually been able to perceive him as having like a stronger backbone, a stronger foundation, which allows me to like respect him even more.
So how does this apply in dating?
How does
Like
the new
radical authenticity in dating, having boundaries in dating, navigating challenges in dating. It's one thing in relationships where there's a safe container, established. But, when you're dating, you're still out there. Like, it's really, a lot of times dating is like a big trust fall.
Totally. Yeah. So for those of you listening who are dating, right, you might be a little bit overwhelmed by this new paradigm because it's like very transparent, right? It's like, oh wow, that really means having another person like see me, and I have a hard time even seeing me sometimes or knowing what my needs are. So if you're meeting people who still cling to old school relationship dynamics, then the new paradigm can be a little bit tricky to navigate. So some
What are some like real like key things that distinguish someone that's still on that frequency of the old paradigm versus the new paradigm when you're dating?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest things are like if I have a client who she really wants her husband to be more vulnerable and more open, but what she finds is that when she asks him like, "How are you feeling?" his response is always like, "I'm good. I'm good. I'm okay. It's okay. Everything's okay. Everything's." So there's this like her husband tends to just like sweep everything under the rug because he doesn't want to rock the boat. And I think that's like a really telltale sign of someone who's like still kind of clinging to the old paradigm of relationships, is that they've probably never done the work of getting in touch with their own emotions, which is really where it starts. Is let me first understand what my needs are, what is it that I'm feeling, and instead of just kind of putting a band-aid over everything and pretending that everything's okay all the time, right?
Yeah.
Because that really does result in dis-ease when we're suppressing or clinging on to suppressed emotion that is not being acknowledged and processed. It creates dis-ease, and it also creates disrupt in relationship when one partner wants to be open and vulnerable and the other one is always shut down. How can you really create in any relationship? How can we create true connection? I know for me, like I have some friends who they're always so curious about like what's going on in my world. And I tend to be someone who's like pretty like open about what's new and alive or what I'm working on emotionally, and
Hmm.
new inner work that I'm dealing with. So,
Hmm.
but I have some friendships who like all they do is they ask. But then if I ask them in return, what's new for you? It's very superficial, it's very surface level. And I find it very hard to create balance in those types of relationships. I find it very challenging to create authentic connection. I feel like it always, for some reason, or you kind of feel like I feel with certain people, they're so private
Yeah.
and they don't like to share things, and so it just becomes much more challenging to create real intimacy that way. If everything is just about the weather, how's the weather outside? Oh,
So
it's raining
true.
outside. Like, yeah, okay. So navigating this new paradigm in the dating world is a lot about being transparent about what you want. right? Like
Hmm.
one of the most powerful things you can do is to state your intentions clearly. Are you dating to find a committed relationship or are you exploring your options? Right? This transparency and honesty up front allows others to either align with your goals or walk away, which is respecting the other person. And it establishes a foundation of respect. Right. So
Hmm.
I'd say like being transparent about what you want, which first starts with like knowing what you want.
Right.
And then there's also, you know, it, another thing I would say is, to release the fear of rejection. Easier said than done. I
So
know.
much easier said than done.
I know. I know. Right? Because in dating,
Or
rejection can.
also reframing rejection, like really looking at that belief and seeing what is actual rejection and what is being redirected or guided to another opportunity.
Exactly, because and that's a manifestation principle, right? In dating, rejection can feel personal, but it's really a redirection. Like rejection is protection and redirection. And so when you show up authentically, then you call in the right people who align with your frequency, who are genuinely meant to connect with you. And then those who aren't aligned will naturally fade out. And that's what you want. If
Hmm.
someone says no to a second date or someone breaks up with you, instead of like getting all depressed over it, there might be a time to grieve it, and that's fine. But to really also simultaneously acknowledge that, oh, I'm being protected from something bigger because if I end up spending the rest of my life with someone who's not a match for me or who doesn't want to be with me, then I'm setting myself up for a future of rejection, for a future of pain. So I'd say try to view dating as a process of finding alignment rather than a hunt for approval, right?
Hmm.
And it's also like another tip would be to cultivate self-love and self-worth. I mean, this is a forever journey, but especially in dating, because dating authentically means that you must first be at home with yourself. Otherwise, you're going to look for home in the other person,
Hmm.
and that is just a recipe for disaster. Now, I just want to clarify, like when I think of my husband, I do feel like there's a sense of home with him.
Hmm.
So that should get established over time. But
Yes.
but to look to the other person for that source of love, to look to the other person to like heal those wounds, like that's a
Yeah.
recipe for a disaster,
And
right?
also too in dating when you're just getting to know someone, it's you can't expect them to be able to have your emotional world mapped out. Or like they might not even feel at home with you, because it's like so new or you're just building something together.
Totally. And when you're cultivating self-love and self-worth from the inside out, then that's what starts to radiate outwards and that becomes magnetic, right? And then it's like whatever the other person does doesn't really affect you as much anymore because you're so anchored in self-love.
Hmm.
And so really it's important to reflect on what makes you feel fulfilled, what makes you feel joyful, what makes you feel valued. Knowing your worth allows you to approach dating with a full heart, right? Rather than needing it to be completed by somebody else.
Right, or validated.
Yeah. And another thing to navigate in this like new paradigm of dating is to really recognize and communicate your boundaries, which we've discussed, but I think it's like really important in dating because that's how you kind of like weed out the people who are not right for you.
Hmm.
Like boundaries really protect your time, boundaries protect your energy, boundaries protect your emotional well-being.
Hmm.
So in this new paradigm, it's essential to communicate boundaries early on. Like what is true for me? What is real for me? And if something doesn't feel right, to voice it. Like boundaries are not about building walls and being untouchable. They're more about
Mm.
creating healthy spaces so that you can both co-create and thrive together.
Awesome. Ayala, can you close this out with a bracha?
Yeah, okay.
This new paradigm, it is definitely, it's like so exciting, but it's also so scary too.
Yeah, I bless us all I bless you all to first and foremost come to know thyself, to stop looking at others to be your source of self-definition, and to really first and foremost start from a place of I know myself and I get to exert myself or assert myself from that place of clarity. So I bless you all with like clarity on what your core values are, what your truths are, what your needs are, to really be able to crystallize and anchor them into your being so that when you do meet your partner, or if you're already in a relationship, you can deepen your relationship with your partner, that you're able to really create an environment, a relationship container that's founded on respect, both of self and of others. And from that place, find compromise, find what works for you, what doesn't work for you, and ultimately create what I believe to be is a healthy, vulnerable, open, and honest relationship.
I mean,
Thanks everyone for listening. What a topic. So, if you listened to today's episode and something really resonated with you, it means the most to me to hear from you. So please comment, message me, let me know how this episode met you, what resonated. And if there's any topics that we haven't covered that you'd like us to cover, by all means, like we do this for you. So speak your truth and let me know. And love you all. Here's to your rising. If you enjoyed this episode, let's keep the conversation going inside the Manifestation Method Portal app, your #1 destination for Kabbalistic manifestation. Inside, you'll unlock the secrets of manifestation through my proven Abra method, rooted in Kabbalah, psychology, and quantum physics, designed to help you manifest real, tangible results from the inside out. Join our global community of manifestors, explore our signature courses, monthly live manifestation workshops with me, Ayelet, and access our transformational hypno activations and attunements to rewire limiting beliefs and align with your soul's purpose. The app is available now on the Apple App Store and Google Play. To sign up, head over to ayeletpolonsky.com. Becoming a co-creator with the Creator is your birthright. Let's manifest the life you desire and deserve together.